Assalamu alaikum. My name is Safiya Gori Ahmed, and I am the Government Relations Director at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I work in the Washington, D.C. office, and I'm really happy to be escaping the really cold weather to be here in LA. I want to thank you all for being here and attending this panel, this roundtable discussion about the state of Muslim American political engagement. On the last panel, we heard about the next American president, some of the issues we hope to address with the next administration, some of the policies we hope to see coming out of the next administration. But in this panel, we really wanted to look at how did Muslim Americans get involved during the election process, during the campaigns. During this historic election, more Muslim Americans than ever went out to vote, ran for office, worked on political campaigns, and were politically engaged. During our election campaign process, we saw, traveling across the country, we saw Muslim Americans working for both campaigns. I was in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and literally everywhere I went, every office that I went to, I saw young Muslims working for the Obama administration or the Obama campaign. I saw them making phone calls. I saw them holding signs on corners. And it was really invigorating to see our community involved in the electoral process. And for many, we say that this has increased beyond any other election that we've seen, and this is what we've heard. And so our next panel is really looking at what the Muslim American community engaged in, what were the activities that we undertook to engage in this electoral process. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the panelists today. And before I begin, I know that we have in your program books that Dr. Agha Saeed would be speaking here also, but he's unable to attend due to some family reasons. But I'd like to introduce our panelists today. First we have A.J. Durrani, who's a grassroots political community organizer from the greater Houston area, and he serves on the Texas State Democratic Executive Committee. He's also the primary coordinator and spokesperson for the Coalition of New American Communities, and was recently elected to the National Platform Committee at the Democratic National Convention. Next to AJ, we have Shejea Khan. Shejea is a senior at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana. Along with her studies, she worked for various faith-based organizations and was a state delegate for the Indiana Democratic State Convention. She was also the 4th Congressional District Chair of the Indiana Muslim Democratic Caucus and recently ran for County Council in Indiana in the 2008 elections. Next to Shejea is Khurram Wahid. Khurram is a founding member of the Center for Voter Advocacy, a nonprofit organization designed to educate and increase political engagement amongst minorities in America. Khurram is also a partner at Wahid, Vizcaino, and Meher, and has worked in conjunction with civil rights organizations to represent scores of individuals detained by the government post 9/11. So as you can see, we have panelists that were all engaged in their own different ways during this election process. And I'd like to remind the speakers that this is a roundtable conversation, so we'll start with you all maybe giving us a glimpse of the work that you all did during the elections, and we can have a few questions, and then I'll open it up for further questions from the audience. So I'll pass the mic to you, AJ.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, said that all politics are local. And although I had worked, like Sophia, in the battleground states this year, the focus was really within the state that I am in, which is Texas. And the focus was to try to mobilize minorities so they could vote in large numbers. This is something we have done for the last 4 years, the Coalition of New American Communities. And this year in 2008, because of the excitement of the Obama as well as Clinton campaigns in the primaries, we saw an unprecedented turnout. However, the focus that we have really put a lot of our resources and focus on has not necessarily just been to identify politicians or have people just go out to vote, but to get an understanding of the political process as far as the parties are concerned. So I don't know if they're going to be able to project some of the stuff that I wanted to show. Muslims, as a community, are not clustered in any one state or city. We don't have the kind of critical mass presence that, for example, the Cubans have in Miami. So we need to be understanding that we need to develop coalitions with others. And in doing so, we need to also understand where they're coming from and thus have a common platform where at all possible. The Democratic Party allows us to do that in different ways. One is by ethnicity. Although they do not have representation for Muslims, they do have representation for Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians, and many of us as Asians have been able to take advantage of that. By getting ourselves identified as a minority or as a community, we have been able to get positions on the Democratic Executive Committee, say in Texas. And my election to the platform committee of the Democratic Party was primarily because of my involvement in getting different communities to work together as well as being represented. So as we talk further, I'll tell you a little bit more about what we had done, how we had gotten the Muslim as well as ethnic vote out, how we had got them to focus not just on election of the president, but also for local offices. So that's all I want to say right now, and pass on to.
Assalamu alaikum. As Safia mentioned, in the last elections, I ran for Hendricks County County Council in Indiana, and I was the first Muslim and first woman to run so in the county council. Within the weeks and months leading up to the elections, we had a big mailing campaign to reach out to the youth and the new voters in our county. And I had supporters all across my county going to the fairs and going to the parades in support of me and other delegates and other candidates in the Hendricks County, and we worked together with the congressional candidate and the other candidates in the county as well. I also helped with the voter registrations across the masjids in Indianapolis area to get them registered to vote, because I think it's very important for the Muslim community to be registered and to know how they're going to vote and what they're going to vote for. I also helped promote the other Democratic candidates in the county. What we did was we brought in the candidates to the masjids, in the local masjids around the county, and we told them, well, these are your candidates. A lot of the Muslims don't know who is running in the county or in the area that they're living in. So we brought them in, we told them, these are your candidates, get to know them, get to know what they're standing for, and how they can help you, and how you can help them.
Assalamu alaikum. The Center for Voter Advocacy Foundation has really just two goals. One is to develop a database of registered Muslim voters, inshallah, eventually nationwide. And we started with focusing on the swing states, and we have a Florida database of over 53,000 registered Muslim voters now. The second phase of our engagement is to educate these folks as to how to participate in the political process, and eventually to offer courses on training how, if you're interested in running for office, how do you do that, how you raise funds, understanding the party structure, and how to fit yourself in. That's been really what we've been working on for the last couple of years. This year, being the presidential election year, we really did a lot of, I think, really important work on getting the vote out. And as we go on, I'll talk a little bit more about how we did that.
Thanks, Khurram. My first question is to you, Khurram, and it's, what are your perceptions of how the political campaigns dealt with the Muslim community? We heard a lot about how the Obama campaign was perceived to be distancing itself from the Muslim community. We saw many articles where Congressman Keith Ellison felt that he was being snubbed by the Obama campaign and not included, and we heard this throughout the campaign trail. So what are some of your thoughts about how the campaigns dealt with our community?
I think that it's multi-layered. It's not such an easy answer, but I think the short version is that they recognized our community is an important community to deal with, that we have financial resources and that we're educated. But they did not believe that we vote. And therefore, they really didn't see the value, I believe, in engaging as they did with other communities, such as the Hispanic community and the Jewish community. Having said that, we dealt a lot with each presidential campaign in terms of trying to get them to understand that this community can be effective in voting, and we've been working on that, and that we need to first see that the candidate wants this community as a potential voting bloc, that they want these folks who identify themselves as Muslim to come out and support that candidate. It doesn't help if you're going out and saying, look, I'm not a Muslim, there's no way I'm anything close to a Muslim, don't call me a Muslim. It doesn't really engender the kind of heartfelt outpouring from our community to go and support that individual. Keith Ellison you'd mentioned, and I was his national campaign finance chair this year, and there's no question he was the first to really be outspoken against President-elect now Obama about that issue. I think President-elect Obama and his team made strategic choices along the way because of the allegations, if you want to call them that, smears, as some called them, including the Obama website at one point, that President-elect Obama was a Muslim. So I think there was a greater distancing. On the McCain side, we saw the other way around, actually. The McCain folks, anytime there was an opportunity, they came out and tried to themselves as a campaign be positive to the Muslim community because they felt that they're fairly desperate, they need somebody, they need the money that our community has. Historically, our community has been Republican, and they wanted that resource. So I think it's interesting that it looks like to me that everybody recognizes we have the resources and the education, but they just don't believe we come out and vote. And so therefore, it's okay to distance ourselves a little bit right now. But I believe that both candidates recognized that we were an important emerging bloc.
And I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything onto that.
I just want to say that every campaign and candidate dealt differently with the Muslim communities. And as far as Indianapolis goes, what we did was, as I mentioned before, we brought in the candidates to the Muslim community. Even though they did feel that some of the candidates were not recognizing the Muslim community, they weren't disheartened. They still wanted to get involved in the political process and still wanted to vote in this historic election. So we did try to change that somehow, but we still have a long way to go with that.
I just wanted to say that even though the Obama campaign was distancing itself from us, we could have taken the attitude that, okay, to heck with it, we are not going to do anything for them. What we did was the exact reverse. MPAC, CVA, the Muslim Democrats from Chicago, we went out and we worked outside of the Obama campaign for the Obama-Biden ticket. And when they saw Muslims working, they developed that relationship of these guys did not come and ask us for anything, they were doing it on their own. And frankly, yes, we were supporting the Obama-Biden ticket, but what we were doing was trying to make sure that the Muslims were mobilized to come out and vote. Because our primary objective is not just one election, our primary objective is involvement of the Muslim community within the American political process. And I think Obama's candidacy gave us that opportunity to really do it well in 2008.
Do you think that this increased activism that we all can say that the Muslim community undertook during the entire election cycle, starting from the primaries, really, do you think that increased activism has impacted the way that we are perceived in this election now that he's won?
Well, we hope so. And I know there's some disappointment right now that there's been no Muslim appointed to the transition team. Yet there are Muslims who are working with the Obama campaign to try and place qualified Muslims in the administration when that opportunity comes. But I think the Obama campaign, at least this is my perception, is that the campaign as well as now the administration looks upon the Muslims not from the viewpoint of the old stereotype, which was these guys are ATM machines. Let's just go ahead and get money from them. But they now look upon us also as being involved in the political process. And frankly, as we talk on later on, when we are involved in the political parties, when we organize ourselves, when we attend political events, not just as Muslims, but as Democrats or Republicans and as Americans, our impact is far greater than if we were to just become a political worker for the campaign.
One question that I heard throughout the entire campaigning season was, are Muslims going to vote in a bloc? And what is the value in voting for a bloc? I know in 2000, several Muslim organizations were urging our community members to vote in a bloc or to vote, with one consistent message for one party, for one candidate. And consistently, we were getting this question at our offices, who should the Muslim community vote for, and should we vote in a bloc? And I'd just like, maybe Khurram or Shejea, if you can talk about some of the benefits or disadvantages, both sides, that could entail for our community in voting in a bloc.
I think foremost is to be educated on the candidates that we had running for this election, local, state, or national candidates. Voting in bloc obviously has its advantages and disadvantages, but foremost, you have to know who you're voting for and get involved in the political process. a lot of the Muslim communities, especially with, I'm going to go back to Indiana here, we were a predominantly Democratic community, and we all did vote in a Democratic bloc. But I think it's very important that you know your own stance, and you know you're not pressurizing other people, like say family and kids and your sons and daughters, well, I'm voting Democrat. My father, he wouldn't tell us who he was voting for. He wanted us to make a decision on our own and to work with that on there.
In Florida, there's the Center for Voter Advocacy Political Action Committee, which essentially is able to contribute to candidates. And it also puts out essentially an endorsement card. Mm-hmm. Now, the purpose is not to block vote for a party. The idea is to have a process, though, where the community can try to meet with candidates and exact from the candidate some type of a sense of how are you going to deal with issues that are important to the members of this community. Once you get that relationship going, now you have people competing for your vote, competing to say the right policy choice that will attract your vote. And that only works, though, if they think you're actually going to come out and vote. So that mechanism, I think, if we can consistently build on that, that will have the greatest leverage for our community. Not to pick one party or another, but to start this relationship, and I agree with what Shejea said about local candidates, start this relationship, work with your local candidates, call them in and say, look, here's the 10 questions that we want to ask you, and we're asking everybody who's running for office. And, you know, 6 out of the 10 are Muslim specific, and 4 are just community related questions. Everybody in the whole district would want to know the answers to those. And you score them, and then you say, based on that, we're going to pick you over you, and you put out a voter card. I think that is the best way for the community to develop a voting habit.
Did you want to add anything? Okay. You know, my next question, and I hate really looking at the challenges or obstacles that we dealt with in working and mobilizing the Muslim vote, but maybe I'd like you know, all three of you to reflect on some of those obstacles and challenges that you dealt with in your local communities, you in Texas, you in Indiana, you in Florida, and looking at how our community can grow. I mean, I know that this election, many people are saying, you know, we saw this increased activism. Was it because of Obama, or is it because our community is actually becoming involved in this process and becoming engaged in this process? And seeing the value of having our voice, you know, heard throughout this, you know, whether it's the campaigning season or whether we're hosting election forums, whether we're phone banking. But, you know, what are those obstacles and challenges that you felt in mobilizing the community, and what are ways that maybe we can deal with those challenges?
One is obviously the Obama candidacy had the excitement, starting in the primaries, at least in Texas, where the primary was in March. The turnout was unprecedented of all communities, not just obviously the Muslim community. The challenge always is that, okay, we have been able to get people energized and excited about an election, and they came to vote. But what happens after that? And so looking at from that viewpoint, what we had decided for this year's election was to continue to contact those people who have voted before. So we got the list of the Muslims who had voted in the primary, because there was some excitement then. And what we didn't want to lose was that many of the people who had voted, by the way, in the primary were Clinton supporters. And we didn't want to lose those Muslims and Asians who were Clinton supporters in the November election to just stand on the sidelines. So we pulled together all the names, and fortunately, because I'm on the state committee, I have access to the Democratic database, pulled that out, identified them in various cities, and mobilized a program of outreach. And that outreach has to be at the grassroots level. It cannot be done by sending out glossy mail drops or just buying time on television. What we focused on was individual contact. And then the other thing was we bought radio time on ethnic radio stations. Not radio time of half an hour. We bought 20 hours in prime time and constantly got the message out and allowed people to call in, discuss, invited candidates on our radio talk shows. And then last but not the least, on election day, had the radio station on all day to get people to know where they're going to go to vote. At least in Texas, you can only vote in the precinct that you live in, and most people don't even remember the precinct number and where they're going to vote, and that allowed so many people to call in and participate and vote. So that was what we had worked on, is to get over the apathy of feeling that they shouldn't be involved, and secondly, how to facilitate their being able to actually go out to vote.
I have to agree with AJ that the lack of information that were within the Muslim communities about voting, about where to vote, about how to vote, we decided to do something about that. At the local masjids in Indianapolis, we had voter registrations every day after, well, every Jummah. Every time we had Jummah, we had voter registrations. We had people come in, and we had them sign up to vote and tell them where they have to go to vote and how they're going to vote and everything like that. And within Indiana, there's a big difference in level of political activism. There's people who don't want to get involved at all, and there's people willing to do everything they can to support the candidates, local, state, and national levels. When they heard that I was running for county council, they were very involved. The community that I live in, where some of the people didn't even register to vote, but they're like, you know, I'm going to vote, I'm going to register so I can vote for you, and maybe I can vote for Obama too. But, you know, they're like, we want to register to vote because this is very important to us that we see a Muslim is running as a candidate. And some of the other communities that I went to, they couldn't even vote for me, but they were very politically involved, and they wanted to support me financially. And they wanted to see me go further than this and do more things in the future.
I think that's great what she's doing, by the way. That's awesome. I mean, we did see that all over the place. Anytime we had Keith Ellison or Andre Carson, who were the two Muslims in Congress, show up somewhere, we had a huge outpouring of folks come to see them. I think that role models is one way that we can help develop, instill in our youth a real bug to get involved in the political process. So I think we need to try to build on what we've got. Phone banking is something that we did in Florida. We have 53,000 registered voters already. Didn't want to spend the time to go register new people. Let's take the ones we got. Let's get them out to vote. So getting out the vote was the biggest focus of the last few months of the campaign for us. Basically saying, I don't care who you vote for, just go out and vote so we can later check and see how many of you voted and get back to these campaign managers and all these party officials to show them that we are very aggressively voting, that we are not just ATM machines, as AJ said, but we do vote, we do care about voicing our opinion. We had, I think the statistics came out, we got 200 volunteers around the state, and that still wasn't enough. AJ was good enough to lend us some people from Houston. We got people from Ohio and Chicago and New Jersey to all call our 53,000 registered voters and go through a survey with them and tell them what their local voting precinct is and get them out to vote. Our statistics showed, as unscientific as they are, just based on our volunteers' phone calling, 64% of the folks we contacted said that they were going to go vote aggressively. We ranked it 1 to 5 on your interest in voting. 64% were either 1s and 2s. About 20% were 5s, and the ones that were 5s often responded with one of two answers at that time. One, it's un-Islamic to vote, and therefore I'm not voting. That was one. And the other one was, oh, there's no point in voting. My vote means nothing anyways. No matter what's going to happen, they're going to have the same policy towards Pakistan and Palestine and wherever it was that their family was from. So I think that we could see some information from there that what the obstacles are and what we have to do to overcome them. We have to shift the dialogue, I believe, to domestic issues. Because if we focus on Palestine and Pakistan and Kashmir and Chechnya, we're never really going to be able to get our community involved, because that's a big thing to tackle. We're not going to get to that for a while, and what are we all going to wait until that gets done to get involved? So I think we have to shift to domestic issues for our community to talk about. And I think that the second thing we have to do is we have to understand that that the generation that's coming up, the younger generation, they will get involved by example. So and vice versa. So we saw that in a family that we called, the kid was very aggressively going to vote, and the father would say, yeah, I'm going to go because my kid is making me go. So I think that we have to get the younger folks and really pull them in, and that is one way to really force all of the older folks, AJ, to get involved and to vote more.
I definitely agree. Everywhere that I went, I saw young people, and I saw young women. I mean, I have to say it, but I saw young women on the campaign trail who were aggressively doing the phone banking and doing the door knocking and were really involved. I have to mention something, AJ, and I got a note about it, that MPAC's a 501c3 organization, which means we can't endorse or support a candidate or a party. I know you mentioned earlier that we were all working for the Obama-Biden campaign and the Obama-Biden team, and we were voting to get the vote out, to get the community to vote and get them engaged. So that's something I just have to mention, one of the little legal issues that I have. Shejea, there's something that you spoke about that I wanted to ask you. Do you feel like when you were running for office and on the campaign trail, was being Muslim a non-issue, or was it something that came up when you were speaking to people whose votes you were trying to get?
Well, I'd have to say, looking at the election results, I didn't win this past election, but I had just as many votes as my Democratic opponent, which means that, the funny name that they saw on the ballot didn't deter them for voting for me. And I think that when we went out to the parades, I had all my supporters with me, and we weren't all Muslim. I had my friends from college and my high school and my sister's friends, and everybody together that went on these parades and fairs together. But because it is a highly conservative Republican county, when they saw me being a muhajaba and going on these trails and be like, okay, well, I'm running for Hendricks County Council, they were kind of hesitant to be like, well, why am I going to vote for a Muslim? You are bad and all this stuff. But I think that for the most part, everybody was really excited first that I was young and that I was going to bring a new voice to the county. And a lot of people didn't even know what Hendricks County Council did. So that was my first step, was to inform them, well, here's what we do, and here's how I can help you. My platform was with the taxes of homeowners and business owners. I'm a business owner myself. So I had a really good platform to work with. So I wanted to deter them away from the fact that I was Muslim, but also break stereotypes that they had of Islam by looking at me running for county council and breaking these stereotypes about Islam.
That's great. I really commend you for all the great work that you did. And I think that's such a positive way to show who Muslims in America are. I mean, we're here, we're running for office, we're engaged. So I really commend you for that. Khurram, you mentioned earlier that our community was historically Republican, and I got a question from someone out in the audience also. Why is it that you have that reference, and is there any sort of data or numbers that you can point to? I know in 2000 we did see that the majority of the Muslim American community voted for the Republican candidate in 2000, but can you sort of talk as to why our community, what party does it fall into, and if it does, why would it be historically Republican?
Even now, when we ran through our 53,000 folks in Florida and we first asked them some preliminary questions, what are you registered as? We still had about 75% registered as Republicans, even though they said they were going to aggressively vote Democrat this time around. I think that goes to a lot of issues. One is that the Republican Party, I believe, sold itself very well over the last couple of decades as the more moral party, the party that had the moral high ground. It had certain issues that it took a position on that I think the majority of Muslims supported, issues that were related to gay and lesbian issues and the positions that the Democrat Party took on that versus the Republican Party, issues on abortion that each party took. I think those really led the way for the 2000 election, where you had an en masse Muslim voting for the Republican Party. But it's also important to note that in that election, President Bush's team met with the Muslim community, and the Al Gore team really didn't want to meet with the Muslim community. So I think that historically the Muslim community is a more conservative community as to its social behavior, and I think that is why we've got this historical Republican bent. But you're seeing a big change right now, not just in this election, but obviously the last 7-8 years of the Bush administration has really alienated the entire Muslim community from the Republican Party. The Republican Party this time around they, for example, held a fundraiser at a physician's house in Orlando for John McCain, where a Muslim doctor held a fundraiser where the buy-in to get, all they needed to do was to raise $50,000 for McCain to be there. Where up the street in Tampa that same weekend for Obama, a Muslim physician held an event for Obama, and they had to raise about $600,000 for him to be there. So you get a sense right now that one campaign was financially desperate. And I think that you also saw that it was very hard for them, even with that low buy-in, to pull the Muslim community in. So I think we're seeing a big shift right now in terms of which party most Muslims are willing to support because of the Bush policy over the last 8 years.
Do you agree in that the Muslim community traditionally has voted Republican and now there's a shift, or would you say that the democratic values, because I know you serve, on the DNC platform committee, you attend the meetings, and how would you say the level of inclusion at that level takes place, but also within the community, what trends are you seeing?
Well, frankly, in the community, yes, in 2000 was probably more evenly divided. I wouldn't say that they were way off on the Republican side. At least I'm talking about my interaction with people. But in the 2008 election, because of all of the positions that the Republican Party had taken, Muslims felt more likely to vote Democratic, not most likely to vote for Obama or more likely to vote for Clinton, at least at the national level. But there's no such thing as a Muslim bloc. The only way a Muslim bloc would exist if there was a national Muslim political party, and unfortunately there is none. So for us to continue to say, quote unquote, we will deliver the Muslim bloc, that has led for some of Muslim political activists to make claims and basically promise something that they really cannot deliver. So I think the Muslims are independent, they're independent thinkers, and they will vote for who they think best represents their interests, and whether it is at the presidential level or at the state level. I think the Muslim community in America has become a lot more aware of politically than they had in the past, and now making decisions based on what's in their self-interest rather than just based on, quote unquote, the Muslim bloc is voting a certain way.
I just received a note that I wanted to read, and it's not really a question, but the person feels the important reason why we were so involved in this election was because we realized we had so much at stake. And we have to emphasize what is at stake, and I think that's absolutely correct. I encourage any of you to pass your questions. I know there are people who are collecting note cards. If you do have any questions, pass them up. How much cooperation did you see among various Muslim active organizations during this election? And I know, AJ, you're laughing, and we've all spent countless hours on conference calls discussing strategies to getting our community involved, getting the vote out, how we can engage both of the campaigns, both the McCain and the Obama campaign, on various issues. So I guess, what are your thoughts on how we did organize amongst ourselves within the various groups, and how we can do a better job?
I start off by saying, there is no Muslim national political organization. Yes, there are national Muslim organizations that either have a bent towards religious organizations via conventions. Of course, MPAC itself is a national Muslim public advocacy group, but there is no one Muslim presence. And although it's been said in the past, quote unquote, we'll deliver the Muslim bloc, there is no one Muslim organization that is working everywhere. Now, in this last election, however, what has happened, and the reason I was smiling was because for the first time, several different Muslim political organizations started to pool their resources. Khurram made a mention that CVA was working in Florida and other places. They called us and we said, fine, we'll deliver you some volunteers to work and call people up. The other thing that we did was we did robocalls all over the United States. MPAC obviously had pulled in with resources of people working in the battleground states. So what has happened this year for a change, that instead of individual Muslim organizations working within their small areas, many of the organizations try to pool resources together, and even though we don't have a single Muslim political organization, by trying to work together, we were able to complement and build upon each other's efforts rather than try to segment them. So in that respect, I think this year was a good cycle to go forward, and I really commend MPAC. So you're here in California and you're in Washington, the work that you all did, and that I was involved in also with you all in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Virginia, was all positive because you all did not just work by yourself, you also worked with others.
I would agree that this was the first time that we really saw a number of organizations come together and really put aside the organizational mantle and say, look, let's work together and figure out how to best execute a mass get out the vote campaign from the Muslim community, with the goal towards eventually being able to show the greater political body that this community aggressively participates and votes and wants their voice heard, because, as I said earlier, they know that we've got education and we've got financial resources, but they don't think we vote. So that was the real goal of coming together. There's no question in my mind, though, that we could have done a better job had we gotten on board earlier, had we gotten a little bit more financial resources from the community for the purpose of getting out the vote. So I think there's some lessons that we learned, and we all got together and debriefed a little and tried to see how do we do better in the future. So inshallah, we can build on what we started. This is just first step.
Great.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I'm sorry I missed it. For the first time, there was a presence, at least at the Democratic National Convention, of a single Muslim gathering. The American Muslim Democratic Caucus invited all the delegates and the National Committee members to one program, and frankly, a lot of this cooperation that we saw came out of that meeting. We didn't go out and organize, but we met each other and we started to work together, and I think that was a very good beginning, and I think that can allow us to build upon as we go through the next several cycles, that rather than having to reinvent it each time, let's build upon what we did last time, say in 2008.
So I have a really interesting question, and the question is, the Democratic Party stands on many principles that do not go along with Islamic teachings. The Republican Party does not seem to be very Muslim-friendly either. Why do you think Muslims should affiliate with either party? And the reason why I think this is an interesting question is because along the work that we at MPAC did in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Virginia, we would always come across a community or a community that really felt like the independent or the Green Party or not the traditional two-party system was the way to go. And this is a question that we dealt with for many months, is how should the community, in affiliating with a political party, what are the ones that best serve our interests, but how does that play out in terms of the two-party system and whether our community does fall under maybe Ralph Nader's party or the Green Party or the Independent Party?
Okay, let me start off by saying every party, irrespective of whether it's just the Democrats or the Republicans, the Libertarians and others, they have some good points, and they may have some points that we don't agree with. Well, we cannot just take those points that we do not agree with and say, well, because we don't agree with you on this point, we're not going to play with you. We're just going to take our marbles and move away. And I think the example that we took when the Obama campaign was keeping us at arm's length, rather than saying, we're not going to work with you, we're not going to work for you, we're just going to go to Republicans, or we're not going to vote, or we're going to go and vote for Ralph Nader, we said, let's, by our example, show them what we are capable of doing, and we did it. So if the Democratic Party, now in power right now, takes some policies or has some policies which are counter to what Muslims really would like, rather than saying, well, we don't agree with what you're doing, so we'll just stay away, let's participate, let's talk to them, let's build upon it, let them know what Muslims have concerns about and what are our interests. And I think through this dialogue, we will reach a common understanding rather than take a position of saying, sorry, we don't agree with you, so we'll just stay away from you.
We had this discussion as well in Indiana. About the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and who we're supposed to go with. And we decided that we need to look at what the main points are of both parties and go, as AJ said, that they have some good points and they have some bad points. We need to look at the majority of the points which are good and go with that party and rather than the other. But obviously there's no right and wrong party, and you need to go what your stances are and go with each party that there is. And also include what the Muslims' points are and how they can improve the Democratic Party and improve the Republican Party as well.
Politics is the combination of people with opinions. That's really all it is, right? So the Republican Party of the 1860s that freed the slaves is not necessarily made up of the same people that the Republican Party of today is made up of. I don't know that the current Republican Party would free the slaves. But having said that, I think what we have to understand is that we have to have a long-term view about participating in the American political process. 30 years from now, if we all get our kids involved today, 30 years from now, what is the Republican Party going to look like? what's the Democrat Party going to look like? So it's really not a matter of what are the positions and the policies they hold today. If you get involved, it is what you want to make of it. So it can easily change. There simply has to be that participatory mechanism, and it's there. It exists in both parties. Simply have to get our folks plugged in, and we can, if we don't like a policy, we can change it. AJ was on the platform committee this year for the Democrat National Convention, and he proposed a policy shift. It didn't go through, but that's because there's only one of him. But if there were 50 of him, maybe it would have gone through. So things can change if we just get involved.
Absolutely. I have received 2 questions, sort of on the same issue. There are a good number of imams who hold the view that voting and political involvement in the electoral process is against the tenets of Islam. It's un-Islamic, it's haram. We heard this. Even in 2008, we still heard that voting is haram. I thought that we were done with that in 2000, but we aren't. So this is, however limited it may be, this view is still out there. And how do we tackle this? How do we deal with this obstacle where some of the leaders are telling the community members that voting is against Islam?
Let me start with that because I do belong to, and I'm on the shore of the Islamic Society of Greater Houston. There will be people, there will be imams who will take a certain position. Like what we said before is if the position that they are espousing is that it is against Islam, what we ask them to do is to provide us specific and concrete instances from the Quran and Sunnah where it is said that you should not participate in decision making which is for your own good. And once we ask them to describe it in that manner, it no longer is a case of you are trying to be involved with the administration or trying to put people in power who can and have taken policies which have hurt the Muslim nations. And so using it from a viewpoint is it or is it not right for individuals to be able to make decisions for themselves which is for their own good? We have been able to diffuse this projection. But I have to admit, I have not, frankly, in Houston in 2008, heard many imams say, do not participate in this. And if they have said so, it has not had much impact. It may have happened in some places, but at least in the area that I have worked with, it does not have much impact. People have not listened to anyone asking individuals to basically stand on the sidelines and don't get politically involved.
I don't know.
I think that if you wanted to, you could get an Islamic opinion to say anything. And really what it comes down to is that the majority of Islamic scholars here in North America, including the Fiqh Council of North America, have come out and supported the Muslim community here to get involved in the political process because it is for the protection and the betterment of this ummah. So I think that's what we have to decide is, do we wish to agree with or participate even in our own community's political aspirations? Do we want to have a better future for our kids? Do we want to have a say in it? Or do we want to sit at home and just yell at Fox News and say we don't like what they're saying? I think that's a decision for each of us to make. And I think that majority of the Islamic scholars in North America have decided it's okay for the Muslim community. And in fact, it's incumbent upon the Muslim community to have a voice in our future.
Absolutely. The next question is for Shejea, and I wanna plug, that you've received many questions about how to run for office and what was the procedure like. And I'd like to say that she will be speaking at a workshop later on this afternoon, specifically on that, how to run for office, how do Muslims, get involved in that process, even if it's for local school board or even further beyond that. But if you just want to maybe just say a few minutes about for individuals or Muslims who would like to run for office, what steps do you recommend that they take?
What I did was when I went to the MPAC Youth Summit in last summer, and I was very involved in the politics there, and I saw that the youth and the Muslim involvement is very important in the local and state level. When I came back and I told my advisor, I was like, well, I want to get involved locally in the elections, and how do I do that? Well, first what we did was we got involved with the Democratic Committee in our county, and a lot of you will have the city, county Democrat parties in the state Democratic or Republican parties. So we approached them and we told them that I wanted to do something with the elections this year. And they told us some of the positions that were open. Obviously, I didn't just pick a position. I went through and researched some of the stuff about the positions and saw what I could do to help my community members, specifically Muslim and non-Muslims, of the taxes that I was talking about earlier about my platform, taxes for homeowners and business owners. So what we did was we basically went to the Democratic chair and we told him that I wanted to do something with the elections and I wanted to show that a young Muslim could do something and could bring change to that.
And again, I think Shejea will be getting into more detail about what the process is like, what fundraising is like, all of those things that I think many of us, frankly, need to know and be educated on. The next question that I have deals with Islamophobia, and I know we touched upon this earlier, but now that we have elected the president, we as the Muslim community that we both wanted and needed, that's not MPAC saying that, but the community member, what can we now do to continue to try to engage the government and to address serious issues such as Islamophobia, both at the local and national level? Khurram?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to understand Islamophobia is not coming out of the White House. It's not something that, even under the Bush administration, it wasn't that the Bush administration created this feeling amongst Americans to be afraid of the Muslim community. I think, if anything, one could say that they recognized this was there and at worst utilized it to their political advantage. So it's there, and it's something that's really not connected directly to Obama or the White House. We have to understand that it really comes down to our own engagement. If we're involved in the process, in the political process, when Shejea is running for office with her hijab and everything like that, that does more to counter Islamophobia than any meeting with the White House will ever do. So it really is a question of how involved we want to get. The more visible we are, the more it's clear to the rest of the American society that we hold the same values they do. We have the same aspirations they do. We have children who we wish to grow up and be as successful and as involved and as good people as they want for their kids. I think that is what will counter Islamophobia the most. If you look at the last 8 years, the Islamophobia increased at the same time as our own community's participation decreased in public life. And maybe we decreased our participation as a response. Maybe it's chicken and egg. I don't know. But the bottom line is there's a clear correlation. So I think that if you go back to September 10th, 2001, the Muslim community was riding high. We were very engaged. We were talking to the Bush administration about appointments. We had people politically appointed. We were involved with local politics. And quite frankly, we have to find a way to get back to that place. And that's really up to us and not up to the White House.
And AJ, I just want to follow up on what Khurram said, but what are ways for Muslims to get involved in the political parties? I know that you started locally, but now you're on one of the platform committees at the DNC. So what are ways that you can advise the community?
One of the things is when you think about political parties, most of the people think about the temporary aspect of a political party. In any given political party, they have a temporary structure and a permanent structure. The temporary structure is what most of us are familiar with. Going to become a delegate, going to the convention, becoming a committee chair. But the permanent structure is one that we really should think about, because that way we are involved at all times. And at least in Texas and many other places, the permanent structure of any party is where you have something called a precinct chair or a precinct judge. It's an elected office, it's a 2-year office, and it's at the lowest level. And we, in Texas and Houston especially, have gotten involved so that 10% of the precinct chairs in Houston and Harris County are Muslims, and Asians are a large percentage of that. And growing up then through that structure, we now have people on the state executive committee. 2 years ago, I and 2 other Muslims were elected to the state executive committee for the first time ever. And it was only because we were involved in that political permanent structure. Likewise, my appointment to the Democratic National Committee for the platform committee is only because of the involvement in the permanent side of the political structure. So that's one thing I would recommend to people is, rather than only get involved every 4 years with the excitement of presidential election, get involved in your political parties, whether Republican or Democrat for that matter. At the grassroots, you will be involved almost on a daily basis. Well, not exactly daily, but on a more regular basis, rather than just as a flash in the pan every 4 years, because it's very difficult to sustain that excitement of a presidential election. But if you're part of the process, you're part of the party, then some things can happen where you can counter Islamophobia, because these precinct chairs are also election judges. So if you have a person like hers behind the desk when you go to vote, so you see a lady wearing a hijab who's the election judge, for example, as we have in Texas, it becomes real difficult to say, I don't like Muslims, but it's all right for me to have an election judge who's a Muslim. So I would continue to focus more on getting involved the political parties at the grassroots level rather than worry about the administration and so on, for the general public, that is.
So I guess the way we can conclude this session is really looking at the question of where do we go from here? What now? We saw this increased participation, we saw this enhanced engagement on the local level, on the national level, throughout elections, in the country. But what steps can we take to really make sure that this level of activism not just continues, but we enhance it, not just for presidential elections, but in 2 years when we have another election or when we have state and local elections. So where do we go from here, and what steps can we take to make sure that our community, the voices of, the concerned voices and the issues that we raise are, one, heard, but that those voices are taken to the next level? I'll have Shejea start.
Okay. I think that this past elections, we have done a lot to get the voter registration out for the Muslims, but I think there's a lot more we can do and have them politically involved in their state and local levels. And I think that we need to encourage Muslims to get involved. And if they feel like they can run as a candidate, as I felt I did, the Muslim communities need to stand behind them and support them any way they can, financially, run their campaigns, help them with the parades and fairs, and go with them and support them and show that, the Muslim community is getting involved, and we're getting involved at a higher level. And also that we need to get them out there to get the exposure and experience, and we just need to take it further from there than we have in this election.
AJ?
Being politically involved, or where do we go from here? Yes, we have built up, at least nationally and in many states, a recognition that Muslims are politically involved and they understand the process. But we also need to be now continuing to work with individuals who might be potential candidates. Yes, there are Muslims who want to go run for office themselves, but we don't have the critical mass to have a Muslim for every political position everywhere. We need to identify those candidates who are thinking of running for office in 2010 or 2009 for that matter, for city elections in various cities. And rather than just basically sit back and say, oh, we have had a great Muslim participation in 2008, now we can sit back and maybe think about going forward and participate in 2012, is just identify, find out who's running for office next in 2009 and 2010. And I'll tell you, we had a runoff election in Texas. The candidate who was running for the runoff election came and approached us and did not say, I'd like the Muslims to come and support me and give money. He basically said, I need your help. Do whatever you can, because I think you guys can really make an impact. And I think once we get to the point where people think of us as having an impact, we will really be, we'll be there politically. And so continue to get involved, continue to find out what the opportunities are. And last but not least, we need to have education. A lot of the work that we did in Texas was based upon seminars and workshops, political workshops, where the general community looks at, and through that they find their own niche, where they want to be a precinct chair, they want to run for election themselves, they want to run as a campaign manager. The mayor of Houston is going to be running for the US Senate. His campaign manager is a Muslim. And many people do not think in terms of, well, I'd like to be a campaign manager, but I think we need to have Muslims think not just as political candidates themselves or other political candidates, but also get involved in the campaigns where they can be campaign workers, even campaign managers.
Khurram?
Well, I'd echo what's been said and just add a little. I think that the supporting of candidates financially and through votes is important. I think it has to be done, though, in a mechanism where there's a return on investment mentality. You don't just give away your resource, which is your vote or your finances, to the candidate. You first try to have an understanding of what it is that the community needs and try to convey that to the folks who are running for office, and then support the one that is most likely to be in line with what the community needs. So I think there needs to be return on investment. That has to be thought out. We definitely have to bundle money and support folks who do agree with our philosophies and do think that the way we think, and therefore we can build leverage slowly, work the local level up. The most important thing, though, and it ties in a little bit with the Islamophobia question earlier, which is, what do you want your kids to be able to do 20, 30 years from now? What opportunities do you want for them? AJ told me a story where a couple of folks in Texas, in Houston, ran for judge. One guy used initials instead of his first name, which was a South Asian name. The other guy used his full South Asian name instead of initials. The guy who used initials, by all accounts, was not nearly as qualified as the other guy. But the guy who only used his initials won. Why is that? Because their society out there is still afraid of either foreigners or Muslims or whatever you want to call it. And that has to change. In 30 years, if your kid's name is Khan or Syed or Muhammad, we don't still want to be having this discussion that that kid has to face this obstacle when they run for office. We want to make sure they have the exact same opportunity to run on their merits as anyone named Smith or Jones or any other name you can come up with. That's what we have to work towards. That should be our long-term goal. That has to be our focus. Otherwise, we're really wasting our time. We won't have any sustained impact on how we can change the community around us. So I would hope that folks understand that this doesn't happen by accident. You have to think about it. You have to have a strategy, and you have to have a goal, and you have to execute it. So inshallah, we can do that together.
I'd like to thank all the panelists here today, and I absolutely echo what you just said, Khurram, and I think MPAC is one of those organizations that is cultivating leaders, that is engaging young minds, encouraging them to be the next generation's policymakers and opinion shapers. So with that, I'd like to end the panel. I'd like to thank all of our guests here again. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.